find your way back home.
Oh my freaking god, dude! That's 4-player difficulty scaling. Yo guys, what is up? Max and Wonderlands video, and today we're going over updated Volt Viper for Chaos 35. Now this is a melee build, and you probably just saw that intro and were like, wow, he's probably got some crazy gear, some ridiculous class mods. Well, actually, the coolest part about this video is for a lot of it and a lot of the footage, I'm actually not wearing a class mod, and sometimes I'm not even wearing rings. That is how strong this build is, and that is how confident I am in this interaction. Just to prove it to you, we're just going to go do it like a quick parasite kill real quick, and then we'll break down everything you need to know and how we're able to do so much damage. So once again, no class mods, no melee rings, just good old damage scaling. Yep, it's crazy. So how are we able to do so much damage with this build? What are the absolute must-have components? And the first thing that you absolutely must have is a live wire. The live wire, when you're holding it and you melee swing with it, you get lightning chains. Now, these lightning chains deal gun damage. These are gun damage chains, but they scale off of your melee hit, and the lower your magazine size is, the more damage the chains deal. Don't believe me? Watch my video from yesterday. I had a 5-minute video just breaking down this interaction, but we're going to be focusing on the chains that are summoned from our melee swings. Now, these hit 3 times, and they hit as hard as our melee, and with this build, we're going to make them hit a lot harder than our melee swing. The next thing that you must have for this build is a way to apply cold or freeze enemies. You could use a Tidebreaker spell for this and apply the soaked effect and chill enemies. I've been using the Empowering Sigil. The reason I'm using the Empowering Sigil is because it's got a ridiculous high chance of freeze and proccing cold effects on enemies. This will insta-freeze basically any ad or any boss. Bosses don't actually freeze, but they'll like get the chilled effect on them. And the reason this is so important is because we're taking advantage of one of the best multipliers in the entire game, and that is Icebreaker. Icebreaker is a separate damage multiplier in the damage formula from just about everything else. This is one of the strongest skills in the game, trust me. And when enemies are frozen, they take a 300% damage increase from being frozen from melee attacks. Note that this won't actually impact the damage of the chain, but it'll impact the damage of our initial melee swing, which this chain will scale off of. An Icebreaker is going to out-damage a Buffmeister. If you are applying a cold status effect to an enemy with our Icebreaker class mod, it'll actually out-damage a Buffmeister, buffing your melee damage and adding like a lightning proc. Trust me, Icebreaker is crazy, and so you want a way to chill your enemies or your bosses before you hit them. Next up, for our melee weapon, you're going to want to use the Wailing Banshee. The Wailing Banshee is the highest base damage of any of the legendary weapons, and it can come in all elements. The elements I recommend looking for this build are Shock and Cryo. It genuinely doesn't matter. A lot of the kills in this video were using a Cryo one. I have come to like the Shock one a little bit more, and then your Hilt mod genuinely doesn't matter. Echo is nice, but if you noticed on any of my boss kills, I'm not shooting the boss with my live wire beforehand. I'm literally just walking up to them, proccing my cold effect, and then swinging. So whatever hilt mod you can get on this works. I actually really enjoy the Ancient Hilt mod, which gives me action skill cooldown back whenever I kill an enemy, or sorry, whenever I melee an enemy, which keeps me in from the shadows when I'm mobbing, and the more time I'm in from the shadows, the more damage I'm going to be dealing. Now, I did not use this Banshee against the raid bosses, and I wanted to make something very clear because it's a little weird and I'm not totally sure why, but the Spellblade actually has a unique damage interaction with the raid bosses. If you are holding the Spellblade, for example, on Barkenstein, you deal more damage to Barkenstein, even with your weapons. If you just have this thing equipped in your weapon slot, you'll deal more damage to the bosses. So for, I think it's only for Barkenstein, for Bunnenhog and Gloopathoth. it shouldn't matter, but I was using the Spellblade against the raid bosses. That's how I did the big damage, and I did proc an Echo effect for that 135 million. I was actually using a Cryo Spellblade, so that 135 million that you saw on screen was simply only Livewire chain proc. That wasn't any of my melee damage, because I hit like Cryo for my melee hit. But yeah, Spellblade for the bosses, and the Banshee, if you can get it, for like basically everything else. And lastly, for my class mod I was using, now once again, this class mod varies a ton, and this is the class mod that I was actually using for survivability. I have a Berserker Spore Warden +3 into Icebreaker. That is what I think is the god roll, getting the Berserker power +3 into Icebreaker. Berserker Stabbomancer class mods work. They're very good, but I do think that the +3 into Icebreaker will net the most damage, even over a +1 into Blast Chill class mod. Blast Chill is ridiculously strong. We know Blast Chill is ridiculously strong, but as you've seen, I'm walking up to enemies in melee, hitting them, and I'm not relying on Blast Chill for my damage. So I can consistently melee one-shot things, and I don't have to worry about a lucky Blast Chill proc to do damage for me, making this build a lot more consistent in its performance. Now, for the actual god roll for this thing, you could use a Tidebreaker for mobbing. Tidebreaker is nice. You don't need it for bossing just because we have the Delusion, and the Delusion can proc that for us. The Smart Armor would technically be the god roll for this build if you could get a +3 Icebreaker Smart Armor. Once again, the Smart Armor is kind of bugged right now, but we would be doing even more damage with the Smart Armor. And the other thing that I did use, this was only for the like raid bosses like Barkenstein and stuff like that, but when I use the Spellblade, I use a Paradigm. If I'm not using the Spellblade, I'm not going to use a Paradigm, but the Paradigm will increase your spell damage by a percentage of your melee damage if you get the correct roll on it, which is a huge damage increase for the Spellblade and makes it even better. So yeah, basically, just look for a +3 Icebreaker. Your actual legendary class mod doesn't really matter too much. Either Corrupted Plate Mail for Dark Magic survivability, a Tides for some increased damage with this Soaked, a Smart Armor if you're min-maxing, a Paradigm. Like, literally, the legendary property on it is not as important, in my opinion, as getting +3 Icebreaker. That is where your huge damage increase is going to come from, and less so your class mod. Having a class mod that has correct rolls on it is just a benefit. For the rest of the gear, I was using a lightning damage Berserker power The Urge, which is going to give me my action skill back faster because I'm going to be constantly casting my spell, and we want to be in From the Shadows at all times, or as much as possible. And then lastly, I was using these 2 melee rings. These melee rings were given to me by a viewer. They're pretty cracked rolled. I've got melee critical hit damage on both. That is what you're looking for. Melee critical hit chance isn't going to do anything for me because I'm obviously going to be in From the Shadows, guaranteeing. So melee damage, melee critical hit. One of these is chaotic, one is volatile. Ideally, you'd look for 2 mood rings. The dealing damage to a boss increased effects doesn't really help me that much because I'm just one swinging the boss. But yeah, 2 mood rings would be the ideal roll, both with melee damage and melee critical hit damage. And now for our skill tree. I don't think this is the best spec skill tree. I just wanted to show you guys what I was wearing for these boss kills, because I was kind of like mixing around with a bunch of things. But I was not spec'd any capstones, and I know you guys are going to hate that, and you're going to question me why. I think Alchemic Agent and Blast Chill are more important than the actual capstones. Alchemic Agent says it only does 10% of melee damage of our status effect. This skill is way stronger than it leads on. It's a huge damage increase, and when I'm running up to an enemy and hitting them once, and I'm guaranteeing critical hitting, Alchemic Agent is a huge damage increase for us, as well as Blast Chill. Blast Chill is not, like, very consistent, but when it does proc, it hits like a truck, so that's also really nice to have. But yeah, in our skill tree, follow-up is great. If we shoot things, we're going to get more melee damage. We're going to get more melee damage and spell damage from Arsenal. Haste is going to give us more movement speed and attack speed. Potent Poisons is more status effect damage and duration. Exploit the Weakness is really good. You don't need points into Sneak Attack because this is additive critical hit damage. It's really not that great. Contagion isn't benefiting from more than 1 point in it. You only need 1 point into Contagion. Alchemic Agent is a huge pickup here. We didn't need 1,000 cuts. And then in our Berserker tree, I really wanted to get Blast, Chill, Cold Snap, and Icebreaker. If you are just running through the Chaos Chambers, you'll probably clear Chaos Chambers faster if you go Blood of the Fallen. There like really isn't that reason. Like, it's okay if you melee an enemy or a boss twice. Trust me, like, it's okay if you melee them twice. I just wanted to see if I could one-hit everything. But yeah, for like actual speeding through Chaos Chambers, I'd spec Blood of the Fallen and go all the way down and lose Alchemic Agent for a little bit less bossing damage, but for more mobbing potential. You'll be in From the Shadows more often. But yeah, I just wanted to show you guys my skill tree and how I spec'd it. And lastly, for these top 5 points, if you're using a cryo weapon, spec Ancestral Frost. If you're not, Savagery is fine to go here. I like to swap back and forth based off of the enemy's health bars. Like if I'm going to hit someone like the Wastard who's got a shock bar, I'm going to use a shock weapon. And if I'm not, if I'm fighting something that's got like a cryo bar, like Gloopathoth, I'll use a cryo weapon to match elements. Matching elements is going to net you more damage than just sticking with one element all the time. So yeah, that's how I spec my skill tree. For my myth rank, I maxed out crit damage, status damage, and I went for the rest of the points into skill cooldown. I want to be critting as hard as possible, and when I'm in from the shadows, I'm going to be guaranteeing critting, so I don't really care too much about my crit chance. Status damage is really nice to have on this build because we proc Alchemic Agent, which is a crazy status effect, and then we also are going skill cooldown to stay in our action skill more often. My melee critical hit chance is trash. I'm at 27% right now. But once again, once I'm in from the shadows, I don't really have to worry about that. So you guys, that is the build video. If you have questions, if you're like have like lingering questions or things that you want explained or are struggling with this build, if you have any questions, come over to the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Monksy. I try to answer every question there, and I'm also going to be trying to hit 200 mil with this build because I think I can do it. If you saw the clip where I hit 135 mil, I had 10 bullets in the magazine still, meaning that I could have gotten at least another like 20% damage probably out of that swing, and I was using a cryo weapon, so I do think that this build could go even higher if like you get the RNG. But yeah, guys, that is it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I will catch y'all in the next one. Take care, guys. Peace.